The hot coffee hit my face like a slap from hell. "Get out!" Karina screamed, her voice cracking the morning silence. Steam rose from the liquid dripping down my cheek, burning my skin, soaking my favorite blue blouse. The mug shattered against the kitchen floor, the same floor where I taught my son to walk 32 years ago. I stood there, frozen. Coffee grounds stuck to my hair. My daughter-in-law's face twisted with rage, her perfectly manicured nails still gripping the handle of what used to be my favorite cup. The one my husband bought me for our anniversary. This was my kitchen. My home. My life. But somehow, in that moment, I became the stranger. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. An hour earlier, everything seemed normal. I'd made cinnamon toast, brewed strong coffee, even hummed while setting the table. Karina smiled at me from across the kitchen island, too wide, too bright. Like she was performing for an invisible audience. "I have a surprise for you, Marjorie," she'd said, sliding an envelope across the granite countertop. Her wedding ring caught the morning light, the same ring my son had saved 3 months to buy. My hands shook as I opened it. Not from age. I'm only 68 and perfectly capable, but from something deeper. Instinct, maybe. The kind that tells you to run before you see the wolf. Inside was a debt notice. $800,000. In her name. I read it twice. 3 times. The numbers didn't change. "It must be paid tomorrow," she added, casual as asking for salt. Her eyes never left my face, watching for my reaction like a scientist studying a lab rat. The paper crackled in my trembling fingers. $800,000. More money than I'd seen in my entire life. More than my house was worth. More than existed in my careful retirement savings. This can't be right," I whispered. Her smile grew sharper. "Oh, it's right. And you're going to pay it." That's when I said the word that changed everything. "No." Her face transformed. The fake sweetness melted away, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Something that had been hiding behind dinner invitations and holiday visits since my son died. The coffee mug flew through the air before I could duck. Now I stood in my own kitchen, scolded and humiliated, while she pointed toward the front door like I was some vagrant who'd wandered in off the street. "You heard me. Get out of my house. Your house." My voice came out small, broken. "Karina, this is my home. I've lived here for 28 years. My husband built this kitchen with his own hands." She laughed. Actually laughed. "Check the deed, Marjorie. Your name isn't on it anymore." The words hit harder than the coffee. My chest tightened. The room started spinning. "That's impossible. This house belongs to me now. My late husband left it to me. And I want you out." Late husband. She called my son her late husband like he was some business transaction instead of the baby boy who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard. I stumbled toward the hallway, my legs unsteady. Coffee still dripped from my hair onto the hardwood floors I'd mopped 1,000 times. In the distance, I heard sirens getting closer. "You called the police?" I turned back toward her, disbelief choking my words. "I called them on a trespasser." Her voice was ice-cold now, all pretense gone. "Someone who refuses to leave private property." The sirens grew louder. My neighbors would hear them. Mrs. Chun from next door, probably peeking through her curtains. The Hendersons across the street, wondering what drama was unfolding at the Delane house. I grabbed my purse from the counter with shaking hands. My keys. My phone. A small bag of photos I always kept by the door. Pictures of my son, my late husband, memories I couldn't leave behind. The sirens stopped. Car doors slammed in my driveway. Karina straightened her blouse and smoothed her hair. When the doorbell rang, she was the picture of composure, the grieving widow dealing with an unstable mother-in-law. But I saw her smile just before she opened the door. A thin, satisfied smile that told me this wasn't spontaneous anger. This was planned. 2 officers stood on my porch. Officer Hartley, tall and broad-shouldered, held a clipboard. Officer Martinez, younger with kind eyes, looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am," Hartley addressed Karina, "we received a call about trespassing?" "Yes, thank you for coming so quickly." Her voice was different now, soft, vulnerable, the voice of a woman who needed protection. "My mother-in-law refuses to leave. She's been difficult since my husband passed." Difficult. The word stung like another slap. "This is my home," I told the officers, my voice stronger than I felt. "I've lived here for nearly 30 years. Officer Hartley glanced at his paperwork. "Do you have documentation proving ownership?" I opened my mouth to answer, but Karina was faster. She handed him a folder, neat and organized, like she'd been preparing for this moment.
"Here's the deed," she said. "Everything's in order." Hartley scanned the papers. His expression changed from professional courtesy to uncomfortable duty. "Ma'am," he said to me, "according to these documents, you don't have legal right to be on this property." The world tilted sideways. I grabbed the doorframe to steady myself. "That can't be right. My name should be." "Your name isn't anywhere on these papers," Martinez said gently. "I'm sorry." I looked at the deed over his shoulder. Clean, official, stamped by the county. Karina's name in bold black letters across the top. My name was nowhere. Erased. Like I'd never existed. Like 28 years of mortgage payments, property taxes, and home repairs had been a dream. "You need to gather your belongings and leave the premises," Hartley said. "If you refuse, we'll have to arrest you for trespassing." Arrest me? In front of my neighbors. In front of the mailman who'd delivered my letters for 15 years. I nodded, unable to speak past the knot in my throat. 20 minutes later, I stood on the sidewalk with a single suitcase and my folder of photos. The coffee had dried on my blouse, leaving a brown stain across the front. My cheek still burned where the liquid had hit. The police cars pulled away. Karina closed the door without looking at me. I turned toward the street, toward my car parked at the curb, toward whatever came next for a woman who'd just lost everything she thought was hers. But as I walked away from the house where I'd raised my son, where I'd loved my husband, where I'd planned to grow old, one thought burned brighter than the coffee stain on my skin. How had she erased me so completely? And why didn't I see it coming? Would you forgive someone who did this to you? Comment below and let me know what you would do in my situation. The motel room smelled like defeat and disinfectant. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like my son's face when he was 5. The air conditioner wheezed and rattled, struggling against the afternoon heat. My coffee-stained blouse lay crumpled in the corner where I'd thrown it. 3 days. 3 days since I'd become homeless in my own town. The Sunset Motel wasn't exactly the Ritz. $29 a night, weekly rates available, cable TV that showed nothing but static on half the channels. But it was all I could afford while I figured out what the hell had happened to my life. My dinner sat untouched on the nightstand, a sleeve of saltine crackers and a bottle of water. Gourmet dining for a woman who used to host Thanksgiving for 12 people. The silence pressed against my ears like cotton. No dishwasher humming. No grandfather clock chiming the hour. No sounds of home. Just me, alone with my thoughts and the growing realization that I might never understand how I'd lost everything. I picked up one of the photos from my folder. My son David at his high school graduation, cap crooked on his head, that lopsided grin that made every girl in town swoon. He'd been so proud that day. "Mom, I'm going to take care of you forever," he'd whispered during the ceremony. Forever turned out to be 26 years. The tears came without warning, hot and angry. I pressed the photo against my chest and let myself sob for the first time since the coffee incident. For David. For my husband. For the house that had held every important moment of my adult life. When the crying stopped, I felt hollow. Empty. Like someone had scooped out my insides and left nothing but skin. That's when I saw it. Tucked in the bottom pocket of my photo folder was an old manila envelope, bent and yellowed with age. I'd forgotten it was there. Had probably been carrying it around for years without thinking about it. Inside were photocopies of documents my husband and I had signed decades ago. Mortgage papers. Insurance policies. Property tax receipts. The boring paperwork of a life built together. I almost put them back. Almost. But something made me look closer. The mortgage papers showed both our names, Harold Delane and Marjorie Delane. Joint ownership. The property tax receipts from last year, paid from my account, my signature, my responsibility. Wait. I grabbed my reading glasses and studied the documents the police had shown me earlier. In my shock, I hadn't really examined them carefully. The deed Karina had presented was clean. Too clean. Official stamps, perfect signatures, county seal. But the date. The date was wrong. According to her deed, the property had been transferred to her 2 weeks before David died. But I remembered paying the property taxes just last month. From my own checking account. With my own signature. How do you pay taxes on a house you don't own? My heart started racing. I spread the papers across the faded bedspread, comparing dates, signatures, official stamps. The more I looked, the more wrong everything seemed. This wasn't grief making me confused. This wasn't old age making me forget details. Someone had been very busy with paperwork. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone who had been planning this for a long time. I reached for my phone with shaking fingers. There was only one person I trusted enough to call. Delphine Mercer had worked as a paralegal for 37 years before retiring. She'd helped my husband and me with our wills years ago, and she had a mind like a steel trap. If anyone could make sense of this mess, it was Del. The phone rang 4 times before her familiar voice answered. "Marjorie? Honey, what's wrong? You sound terrible." I tried to speak, but the words came out in a rush. Coffee throwing, police, motel room, wrong dates, forged papers. "Slow down," Del said gently. "Start from the beginning." So I did. I told her everything, from Karina's fake smile at breakfast to the moment I'd walked away from my own house with nothing but a suitcase. When I finished, the line was quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. "Del? You still there?" "I'm here." Her voice was different now. Sharper. Professional. "Marjorie, listen to me very carefully. Don't throw away any of those old papers. Don't talk to Karina. Don't sign anything. Can you meet me tomorrow morning?" "Of course, but 9 o'clock. Denny's on 5th Street. Bring everything you have." She hung up before I could ask why she sounded so worried. I sat in the motel room as darkness fell outside, surrounded by scattered documents and growing certainty that I'd stumbled onto something bigger than a simple family dispute. If you believe family should never betray family, hit that like button right now.
Del's coffee cup rattled against the saucer when she set it down. Jesus Christ, Marjorie. This is worse than I thought. We sat in a corner booth at Denny's, papers spread between the syrup dispenser and salt shaker. Del's reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she studied each document like a detective examining evidence. Which, I was starting to realize, is exactly what she was doing. Look at this notary seal, she said, pointing to a stamp on Karina's deed. See the date? March 15, 2023. But the notary's license expired in January 2023. I checked online while you were in the bathroom. My stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means this document is worthless. Fraudulent. Whoever notarized this either didn't know their license had expired or they knew exactly what they were doing, I finished. Dell nodded grimly. There's more. The witness signature on this property transfer? Arthur Bell. She pulled out her phone and showed me a search result. There's no Arthur Bell registered as a notary public in this county. Ever. The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. But the police saw it. They said it was official. Honey, police aren't document experts. They see official-looking papers with the right stamps and signatures. They assume it's legitimate. Most people would. A waitress refilled our coffee cups, oblivious to the fact that my entire world was reshaping itself around forged paperwork and fake witnesses. There's something else, Dell continued, her voice dropping lower. These tax receipts of yours? The ones showing payments from your account? They prove continuous ownership. You can't pay property taxes on a house you don't own. The county won't let you. So the house is still mine? Legally? Yes. But proving it? She gestured at the scattered papers. That's going to be complicated. Especially since she's got the sheriff's office thinking you're just a confused old woman who doesn't understand how inheritance works. Confused old woman. The phrase stung, but it also sparked something inside me. Something angry and determined. She's been planning this for months, hasn't she? The words came out harder than I intended. Maybe even before David died. Dell's expression darkened. The metadata on these digital copies tells a story. Late-night edits, multiple versions, changes made right up until the day before your son's funeral. Someone was very, very busy while you were grieving. I thought about Karina at the funeral. How composed she'd been. How she'd handled all the details, while I sobbed into tissues. How grateful I'd been that she was taking care of the paperwork so I didn't have to. She'd been taking care of the paperwork, all right. Just not the way I'd thought. What kind of person does this? I whispered. David loved her. He trusted her with everything. The kind of person who sees dollar signs instead of people, Dell said flatly. Your house is worth what, $300,000? Maybe more in this market. That's a lot of motivation for someone without a conscience. $300,000. Enough to pay off mysterious debts. Enough to start a new life somewhere else. Enough to make an inconvenient mother-in-law disappear. What do I do? The question came out small and desperate. Dell leaned forward, her eyes intense. We fight back. But we're going to need help. Professional help. A lawyer. The right kind of lawyer. Someone who specializes in this type of fraud. Someone who's seen this before and knows how to prove it in court. The word court sent a chill down my spine. I'd never been in a courtroom in my life except for jury duty. The idea of facing Karina across a legal battlefield terrified me. But the alternative was spending the rest of my life in motel rooms, watching my savings disappear $29 at a time. I know someone, Dell said, already reaching for her phone. Lionel Cray. He handles elder abuse cases. Specializes in family members who steal from seniors. Elder abuse. Is that what this was? Not just a property dispute or family drama, but actual abuse? Dell dialed a number from memory. Lionel? It's Dell Mercer. I need a favor. While she talked, I stared out the window at the parking lot. Normal people going about their normal lives, grabbing coffee and heading to work. None of them knew that their world could disappear with a few forged signatures and a well-rehearsed performance. "He can see us tomorrow afternoon," Dell announced, hanging up. "But Marjorie, I need to tell you something else." The serious tone in her voice made my chest tighten. This kind of fraud, it's not usually a one-person operation, especially with forged notary seals and fake witnesses. Someone helped her. Someone with access to official forms and stamps. Who? Could be anyone. Real estate agent, bank employee, someone at the county recorder's office. The point is, this goes deeper than just your daughter-in-law getting greedy. A conspiracy. That's what Dell was talking about. Multiple people working together to steal my life out from under me. How many other seniors had they done this to? How many other confused old women were sitting in motel rooms, wondering how they'd lost everything? The anger that had been building inside me for 3 days finally found its voice. "I want them all," I said quietly. "Everyone who helped her. Everyone who touched those papers. I want them to pay for what they've done." Dell smiled for the first time since we'd sat down. "Now you're talking. But first, we need to gather more evidence. Bank records, phone logs, anything that shows a pattern." "How do we do that?" "Very carefully. And very quietly. Because if Karina realizes we're onto her..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. I could imagine what someone capable of this level of deception might do if they felt cornered. "There's something else we need to discuss," Dell said, her voice dropping even lower. "The $800,000 debt she showed you? That's not random. That's specific. Targeted." "What do you mean?" "I mean someone did their homework. They know exactly how much you're worth, down to the penny. Your house, your savings, your life insurance payout from Harold. 800,000 is probably everything you have." The realization hit me like ice water. This wasn't just about stealing my house. This was about taking everything. Every dollar, every asset, every piece of security I had left.
They wanted to leave me with nothing. "Marjorie." Dell's voice seemed far away. "You okay?" I looked across the table at my friend, at the woman who was willing to help me fight back against people who had made a science out of destroying lives. "Dell," I said, my voice steady for the first time in days, "they picked the wrong old lady to mess with." She grinned. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." As we gathered the papers to leave, I caught my reflection in the restaurant window. 3 days ago, I'd been a victim. A confused old woman who didn't understand how the world worked. But that woman was gone. In her place sat someone harder. Someone who'd learned that the people you trust most are sometimes the ones who hurt you worst. Someone who was done being erased. But as we walked toward the parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. That somewhere in the shadows, the people who'd stolen my life were already planning their next move. Subscribe if you want to see how Marjorie fights back against this massive fraud. The bank records told a story I wasn't prepared to hear. "Look at this," Lionel Cray said, sliding a printout across his desk. "Property tax payments, every year from your account. Right up until last month." His office smelled like old books and fresh determination. Legal volumes lined the walls, each one thick enough to stop a bullet. Case files stacked on every surface told stories of other people who'd been cheated, lied to, erased from their own lives. But none of them had been erased as thoroughly as me. How is that possible if the house was supposedly transferred 2 weeks before David died? I asked, though I already knew the answer. "It's not possible," Lionel said simply. "You can't pay taxes on property you don't own. The county computer system won't even process the payment. It would bounce back immediately. Dell leaned forward in her chair. Show her the metadata report. Lionel pulled up another document on his computer screen. This is where it gets interesting. The digital versions of your deed transfer? They were created on March 10th, edited on March 12th, and finalized on March 14th. David died on March 15th, I whispered. Exactly. Someone was working on these documents right up until the day before your son's death, making final adjustments, perfecting the forgeries. The room went silent except for the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of traffic outside. The implications hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. You're saying they knew? My voice cracked. They knew David was going to die. Lionel exchanged a look with Delaware. We're not saying anything yet. But the timeline is suspicious. Suspicious. Such a small word for something so enormous. The idea that my son's death might not have been the accident everyone thought it was. No. I couldn't go there. Not yet. Not without proof. What else do the records show? I asked, forcing myself to focus on what we could prove. Phone calls, Dell said, consulting her notes. Lots of calls between Karina and a number registered to someone named Marcus Webb. Real estate agent, specializes in quick property transfers. And guess who witnessed one of the forged documents? Lionel added. Marcus Webb's assistant, Sarah Chun. Except Sarah Chun quit that job 6 months ago and moved to Oregon. Another fake witness. Another impossible signature. How deep does this go? I asked. Deeper than we first thought, Lionel admitted. We've found similar document patterns in 3 other cases this year. All elderly property owners. All mysterious property transfers right after a family member's death. All involving the same notary stamps and witness signatures. 3 other families. 3 other people who'd lost everything to the same group of thieves. Are they okay? The other victims. Lionel's expression darkened. One moved in with relatives in another state. One is in a nursing home now, couldn't afford to live independently. The third. He didn't finish, but I understood. Some people don't survive having their entire life stolen. We need to move fast, Dell said. If they realize we're investigating, they might destroy evidence. Or worse, they might try to complete the theft by forcing you to sign additional documents. What kind of documents? Power of attorney papers. Medical guardianship forms. Anything that would give them legal control over your remaining assets while making it look like you're incompetent to manage your own affairs. The coffee I'd been sipping turned bitter in my mouth. They weren't just stealing my house. They were planning to steal my freedom, my dignity, my basic right to make decisions about my own life. There's something else, Lionel continued. The debt notice Karina showed you? The $800,000. What about it? It doesn't exist. We've run credit checks, contacted every major lender in the state. There is no legitimate debt in Karina's name for that amount. Relief and anger crashed together in my chest. So she made it up? The whole thing was theater, Dell said. Designed to panic you into agreeing to help her. If you'd said yes, if you'd signed whatever papers she had ready, I'd have lost everything voluntarily, I finished. No investigation, no questions asked. Just a generous mother-in-law helping her struggling daughter-in-law. Exactly. And when the dust settled, you'd be the one holding the debt while she owned everything you'd worked for your entire life. I thought about that morning in the kitchen. How rehearsed Karina's performance had seemed. How quickly she'd turned violent when I refused to cooperate. How perfectly timed the police arrival had been. She never expected me to say no, I realized. The whole plan depended on me being a pushover. Lionel smiled grimly. Lucky for us, you're not. What's our next step? We file for an emergency injunction to freeze all property transfers, he said. That prevents her from selling or refinancing the house while we build our case. Then we start gathering evidence for criminal charges. Criminal charges. The words sent a thrill through me that I probably shouldn't have enjoyed. How long will that take? Months, maybe longer. But Marjorie, I need you to understand something. These people are professionals. They've done this before, and they're good at it. When they realize what we're doing, they're going to fight back. What kind of fighting back? Dell and Lionel exchanged another look. Intimidation, Dell said. Harassment. Maybe legal threats of their own. They might try to have you declared mentally incompetent. They might claim you're dangerous or delusional. But we have proof now. We have evidence, Lionel corrected. Proof comes when a judge agrees with our interpretation of that evidence. Until then, you're still just a confused old woman who doesn't understand legal documents. The familiar phrase hit like a physical blow. Even with forged papers and fake witnesses, even with bank records and metadata, I was still fighting the assumption that I was too old and too female to understand my own life.
There's something else we need to discuss, Lionel continued. Your safety. If this group has stolen from multiple victims, if they're willing to forge official documents and create fake identities, we have to assume they're capable of other crimes. You think they'd hurt me? I think desperate people do desperate things. And we're about to make them very desperate. The afternoon sun slanted through the office windows, casting long shadows across the legal documents scattered on Lionel's desk. Somewhere in those papers was the key to getting my life back. But somewhere else, in offices and homes I'd never seen, people were probably planning how to stop me. I want to go forward, I said. Whatever the risks. Lionel nodded. Then we start tomorrow. Emergency injunction first thing in the morning. As we gathered the documents and prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with a text message. From Karina. We need to talk. There are things you don't understand about David's death. My blood turned to ice water. Dell saw my expression. What is it? I showed her the message. Her face went pale. Don't respond, Lionel said immediately. Don't engage with her at all. But the damage was already done. The seed was planted. The question I'd been trying not to ask was now written in black and white on my phone screen. What if David's death wasn't an accident? What if everything, the timing, the forged documents, the perfect setup, had been planned from the very beginning? And what if the people who'd stolen my house were capable of something much, much worse? Hit the like button if you believe the truth always comes out, no matter how deep someone tries to bury it.
The courthouse steps felt steeper than they should have. Maybe it was my age. Maybe it was the weight of the evidence folder in my arms. Or maybe it was the knowledge that everything I had left in this world depended on the next few hours. Lionel walked beside me, his briefcase swinging with practiced confidence. Dell flanked my other side, her paralegal instincts sharp and alert. Together, we climbed toward justice. Or what I hoped would be justice. Remember, Lionel said quietly, this is just the preliminary hearing. We're asking for a temporary restraining order to freeze the property. Nothing more. Will she be there? I asked. Probably. Her lawyer too. The idea of facing Karina in an official setting made my stomach clench. The last time I'd seen her, she'd thrown coffee in my face and called the police. What would she do in a courtroom, backed into a corner with legal documents that didn't add up? We pushed through the heavy doors into the courthouse lobby. The smell of floor wax and old paper hung in the air. People in business suits hurried past, their heels clicking on marble floors, everyone looking like they knew exactly where they belonged. I felt like an imposter in my best dress and sensible shoes. "There," Dell whispered, nodding toward the hallway. Karina sat on a bench outside courtroom 3, perfectly put together in a black suit that probably cost more than my monthly motel bill. Her lawyer, a thin man with silver hair, leaned over documents spread between them. She looked up as we approached. Our eyes met for the first time since the coffee incident. I expected anger, hatred, the cold calculation I'd seen in my kitchen. Instead, she smiled. Not the fake, too wide smile from that morning. Something sadder. More genuine. Like she was genuinely happy to see me. "Marjorie," she said, standing up. "I'm so glad you came." The warmth in her voice threw me completely off balance. This wasn't the woman who'd screamed at me to get out of my own house. This was the daughter-in-law who'd helped plan David's funeral, who'd held my hand during the burial, who'd seemed like the daughter I'd never had. "Karina." I kept my voice neutral. "We really need to talk," she continued. "There are so many things you don't understand. About David. About what really happened." Lionel stepped closer to me. "My client has nothing to say without her attorney present." Of course. Karina's lawyer nodded professionally. "But perhaps we could arrange a meeting? There might be ways to resolve this without involving the courts." "The time for private meetings is over," Dell said sharply. "Too much has already happened behind closed doors." Karina's expression shifted slightly. The warmth dimmed, replaced by something harder to read. "I never wanted it to come to this," she said, and for a moment, she almost sounded sincere. "Marjorie, you have to believe me. Everything I did was to protect David's legacy." "By stealing his mother's house?" The words came out harsher than I'd intended. "By saving it," she replied. "There are debts you don't know about. Problems David was hiding from you. I was trying to shield you from." "All rise," the bailiff's voice cut through our conversation. "Court is now in session, the Honorable Judge Patricia Winters presiding." We filed into the courtroom like actors taking their places for a performance that would determine the rest of my life. I sat behind Lionel at the plaintiff's table. Karina and her lawyer took their seats across the aisle.
The distance between us felt like a canyon. Judge Winters was younger than I'd expected, maybe 50, with sharp eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. She reviewed the files in front of her with the kind of attention that suggested she didn't miss much. "This is a request for a temporary restraining order to freeze property assets pending investigation of allegedly fraudulent documents," she said. "Mr. Cray, you may proceed." Lionel stood, confident and prepared. "Your Honor, we have clear evidence that the property transfer documents presented to the sheriff's office contain multiple fraudulent elements." He walked to the evidence table and began laying out the proof we'd collected. Forged notary seals, fake witnesses, impossible dates and signatures. "The defendant has presented what appears to be a legitimate property deed," he continued, "but our investigation shows systematic fraud designed to steal real property from an elderly widow." I watched Karina's face as Lionel spoke. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tightening around her eyes. "Furthermore," Lionel continued, "we have evidence that this is part of a larger pattern of elder abuse targeting vulnerable property owners throughout the county." Karina's lawyer stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. These are serious accusations without sufficient foundation." "I'll allow it for now," Judge Winters said. "Mr. Cray, please present your evidence." What followed was 20 minutes of technical testimony about document analysis, notary procedures, and property law. Lionel methodically destroyed every piece of paper Karina had used to steal my house. The forged notary seal with an expired license. The witness who didn't exist. The impossible timeline that had property changing hands while I continued paying taxes. The fake debt notice designed to manipulate me into signing over my assets. With each revelation, I felt a little more of my life being restored. A little more validation that I wasn't crazy, wasn't confused, wasn't just a difficult old woman who didn't understand how the world worked. Your Honor, Karina's lawyer said when it was his turn, this is a family dispute that's gotten out of hand. Mrs. Delane is understandably grieving the loss of her son, but that grief has caused her to misinterpret legitimate legal documents. Misinterpret. There was that word again. The subtle suggestion that I was too old, too emotional, too female to understand my own paperwork. My client has provided properly executed deeds and transfer documents, he continued. If there are technical irregularities, they can be corrected without freezing legitimate property transfers. Technical irregularities? Lionel stood back up. Your Honor, these aren't typos. These are felonies. Fraud, forgery, identity theft. Mr. Cray, Judge Winters interrupted. I've heard enough for now. The courtroom fell silent. I could hear my own heartbeat in the quiet. Judge Winters studied the documents one more time, her expression unreadable. The seconds stretched like hours. Based on the evidence presented, she finally said, I'm granting the temporary restraining order. All property transfers are frozen pending full investigation. Relief flooded through me so fast I felt dizzy. Dell squeezed my hand. Lionel allowed himself a small smile. But it wasn't over. However, the judge continued, I'm also ordering a comprehensive review of all parties' mental competency and financial capacity. This court will not be party to elder abuse in either direction. Mental competency. The words hit like ice water. I turned to look at Karina. She was whispering urgently to her lawyer, but when she caught me looking, she smiled again. That same sad, genuine smile. As if she knew something I didn't. As if the real game was just beginning. This hearing is adjourned, Judge Winters announced. Next review date is set for 2 weeks from today. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Karina approached me one more time. Marjorie, she said softly, I tried to do this the easy way. I tried to protect you from the truth about David. But if you want to make this public, if you want every detail examined. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Some secrets are more dangerous than you think. Then she walked away, leaving me with questions that burned hotter than the coffee she'd thrown in my face. What secrets was she talking about? What truth about David was she so desperate to hide? And why did I have the terrible feeling that winning this battle might cost me more than losing it? Comment justice if you want to see her fall, but hold tight, this story is about to take a turn no one saw coming.
The knock on my motel door came at midnight. 3 sharp raps that cut through the silence like gunshots. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the thin curtains, I could see a shadow standing outside my door. This was it. David's creditors had found me. I grabbed my phone with shaking fingers, ready to call 911, when a familiar voice called out. Marjorie, it's me. We need to talk. Karina. I crept to the door and peered through the peephole. She stood alone in the parking lot, no lawyer, no backup. Just a woman in jeans and a hoodie who looked as scared as I felt. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay locked inside, I opened the door. What do you want? My voice came out steadier than I felt. To tell you the truth. All of it. Before someone else gets hurt. She looked older than she had in the courtroom. Tired. Like she hadn't slept in days. Can I come in? Please? What I have to say, you don't want the whole motel hearing it. I stepped aside. She entered and immediately moved to the window, peering out at the parking lot like she was checking for followers. They know where you are, she said without preamble. The people David owed money to. They've been watching you. Ice water flooded my veins. How do you know? Because they contacted me 3 days ago. Wanted to know if you'd paid off his debts yet. When I told them about the court case, about the property being frozen. She turned from the window, her face pale. They're not happy, Marjorie. These aren't the kind of people who wait for legal proceedings. I sank onto the edge of the bed. How much? How much did David owe? $250,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. More than my house was worth. More than I had in savings. More than I could pay if I liquidated everything I owned. That's impossible. David didn't have that kind of money to gamble with. He didn't start with that much. Karina sat in the room's single chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. It started small. A few hundred here and there. Online poker, sports betting. Then he got in deeper. Started borrowing to cover losses. The interest compounds fast with these people. Why didn't he come to me? Why didn't he ask for help? Because he was ashamed. And because he was scared of what you'd think of him. The words stung because they rang true. I'd raised David to be responsible, hardworking, honest. If he'd come to me with gambling problems, would I have helped him? Or would I have lectured him about making better choices? The night he died, Karina continued, he called me crying. Said they'd given him 24 hours to come up with $50,000 or they'd start collecting from his family. From me. From you. He was driving to your house to confess everything. To ask you to mortgage the property to save his life. The room spun around me. My son had died on his way to beg me for help. Had died scared and desperate and ashamed. The curve where he crashed, I whispered. He'd driven that road 1,000 times. The police report says he was going 90 miles an hour. Skid marks suggest he tried to brake suddenly, like something startled him. Or someone. You think they killed him? I think they sent someone to follow him. To make sure he was really going for the money. And when his car went off the road. She shrugged, but I could see the pain in her eyes. Whatever else she'd done, she'd loved my son. They let him die, she said quietly. Then they came to his funeral, looking like mourners, taking pictures of everyone who attended. Figuring out who might be good for the money he owed. That's why you transferred the house. To keep them from taking it. I thought if it was in my name, if I could sell it quietly and pay them off, you'd be safe. You'd never have to know what David had gotten himself into. I stared at this woman I'd thought was my enemy. But you could have just told me. We could have worked together. With what money, Marjorie? You don't have $250,000. Nobody does. These people don't negotiate payment plans. They take what they can get, then they make examples out of people who can't pay. The motel room felt smaller suddenly. Like the walls were closing in. What kind of examples? Karina's expression darkened. Remember Mrs. Patterson from Elm Street? The one who fell down her stairs last month. I nodded. Sweet old lady who'd lived alone. The neighbors said it was a tragic accident. Her grandson owed them money too. $60,000. She couldn't pay. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Mrs. Patterson hadn't fallen. She'd been pushed. How many others? I asked. More than you want to know. This isn't just about gambling, Marjorie. These people run everything. Drugs, loan sharking, protection rackets. They're not going to write off $250,000 because an old woman claims she didn't know about her son's debts. I felt sick. David hadn't just gambled away money. He'd gotten involved with organized crime. Had put both our lives in danger. What do they want from me now? Everything. Your house, your savings, your life insurance policies. They want you to sign over every asset you have, and even then it won't be enough. And if I don't? Karina met my eyes. Then they'll arrange another accident. Make it look like grief made you careless. Maybe you forgot to turn off the gas stove. Maybe you fell asleep with a cigarette, even though you don't smoke. Terror crawled up my spine. We have to go to the police. With what proof? David's dead. His gambling accounts were offshore and encrypted. These people don't leave paper trails, Marjorie. They're not stupid. Then what do? We disappear. Both of us. I've got some money saved, enough to get us started somewhere far away. New names, new lives. I stared at her. You want me to run away from my entire life? I want you to live. Because staying here means dying, and dying means they win. Outside, a car door slammed. Karina was at the window instantly, peering through the curtains. Shit, she whispered. Black SUV. 2 men getting out. My blood turned to ice. Are they? We need to go. Right now. She grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the back of the room. Is there a back exit? I don't know. The door exploded inward. 2 men in dark suits filled the doorway. The bigger one smiled when he saw us. Mrs. Delane, he said politely, like he was introducing himself at church. My name is Vincent. We need to discuss your son's outstanding obligations. Karina stepped in front of me. She doesn't know anything about David's debts. Oh, but she will, Vincent said. By tomorrow morning, she's going to know everything. And then she's going to pay everything. The smaller man closed the door behind them and turned the lock. Now, Vincent continued, let's talk about how you're going to make this right. If you're holding your breath right now, hit that like button. But this nightmare is just getting started.
Vincent's smile never wavered, but his eyes were dead as winter. Sit down, ladies. This is going to be a long conversation. I remained frozen by the window. Karina hadn't moved either, her body still positioned protectively between me and the 2 men who'd just broken into my motel room. I said, sit down. Vincent's voice didn't get louder, but something in it made my knees buckle. I sank into the chair Karina had vacated. She perched on the edge of the bed, her hands clenched into fists. The smaller man, who looked like an accountant in a funeral suit, pulled out a tablet and began swiping through screens. David Michael Delane, he read in a nasal voice. Age 32. Deceased March 15th. Outstanding balance with our organization, $247,836.14. The precision of that number terrified me more than the amount. These people kept detailed records. Plus interest, Vincent added cheerfully. 3% per day since the date of death. We're reasonable people, but business is business. 3% per day. I tried to calculate what that meant, but my brain felt like it was wrapped in cotton. That's $15,000 in additional charges, the accountant said, apparently reading my mind. Growing by $7,000 daily. I don't have that kind of money, I whispered. But you have assets, Vincent replied. Real estate. Savings accounts. Life insurance policies. Investment portfolios. We've done our research, Mrs. Delane. You're worth approximately $320,000 if you liquidate everything. They knew my financial situation better than I did. Had probably been investigating me for weeks. That still leaves you short, Karina said. What happens then? Vincent's smile widened. Then we get creative. He moved to the dresser and picked up the photo of David I kept there. The one from his high school graduation. Handsome boy, he said conversationally. Shame about that accident. Terrible thing, losing control on a curve like that. You killed him, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Did we? Vincent set the photo down carefully. The police report says mechanical failure. Brakes went out. Could happen to anyone who doesn't maintain their vehicle properly. David's car was only 2 years old. Brake lines can be delicate things, the accountant observed. Amazing how they can just fail when you need them most. They had killed him. Maybe not directly, but they'd caused his death as surely as if they'd pushed him off that cliff themselves. Here's what's going to happen, Vincent continued. Tomorrow morning, you're going to your bank. You're going to withdraw every penny from your accounts. Then you're going to your lawyer and you're going to sign papers transferring all your real estate holdings to our associates. And if I refuse? You won't refuse. His voice was still pleasant, but ice-cold. Because tonight, we're going to take a little drive. Show you what happens to people who don't pay their debts. The room tilted sideways. Where are you taking me? Field trip, the accountant said, closing his tablet. Educational purposes. Vincent gestured toward the door. After you, ladies. Karina stood up slowly. If we go with you, we're not coming back. That depends entirely on how cooperative Mrs. Delane plans to be. We walked out into the parking lot like we were old friends going to dinner. Vincent's hand rested lightly on my elbow, but I could feel the strength in his grip. Running wasn't an option. The black SUV idled in front of my motel room, windows tinted so dark they looked like mirrors. Vincent opened the back door and gestured for us to get in. Please, Karina said. She's an old woman. She didn't know anything about David's problems. Age is irrelevant, Vincent replied. Debt is inherited. It's a family business. The interior of the SUV smelled like leather and fear. I slid across the seat, Karina beside me. Vincent climbed in after us while the accountant took the passenger seat. Drive, Vincent said to someone I couldn't see. We pulled out of the motel parking lot and onto the highway. Through the tinted windows, I watched my town disappear into darkness. Where are we going? I asked. You'll see. 20 minutes later, we turned onto a dirt road I didn't recognize. Gravel crunched under the tires as we wound through dense woods, headlights carving a tunnel through the black. We stopped in a clearing where another car was already waiting. A sedan with its trunk open. Get out, Vincent said. The night air was cold against my skin. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. Otherwise, the silence was absolute. Vincent walked to the sedan and peered into the trunk. Mrs. Delane, I'd like you to meet someone. I didn't want to look. Every instinct told me to run, to scream, to do anything except take another step toward that car. But Vincent's hand on my back propelled me forward. The trunk light illuminated a man's face. Middle-aged, eyes closed, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. He wasn't moving. This is Roberto, Vincent said conversationally. Roberto owed us $80,000. Last week, he tried to skip town instead of paying. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Couldn't process what I was seeing. Roberto had a mother too, Vincent continued. Sweet old lady, lived in a nice little house on Maple Street. Kept a garden, fed stray cats, minded her own business. He slammed the trunk shut. Had being the operative phrase. My legs gave out. I would have hit the ground if Karina hadn't caught me. Do you understand now? Vincent asked. This isn't about money anymore. This is about sending a message. Your son borrowed from us, then died before paying us back. That debt doesn't disappear with death, Mrs. Delane. It transfers. To family, the accountant added helpfully.
But I'm reasonable, Vincent said. I don't want to hurt innocent people. So I'm giving you a choice. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph. My house, lit up in the darkness. A car in the driveway I didn't recognize. We have people watching your property. If you don't cooperate, if you try to run or hide or involve the police, that house burns down. With anyone inside it. There's nobody in my house. Are you sure? Your neighbor Mrs. Chun has been checking on it every few days. Watering your plants, collecting your mail. Very thoughtful of her. Mrs. Chun. My sweet, elderly neighbor who'd brought me soup when I had the flu. Who'd helped me plant roses in my front yard. You're monsters, I whispered. We're business people, Vincent corrected. And business is business. He gestured toward the SUV. Get back in. We're taking you home now. You have until noon tomorrow to gather the money. Every penny. If you're even $1 short. He didn't need to finish the threat. The image of that man in the trunk would be burned into my memory forever. As we drove back toward town, I stared out at the passing landscape and realized that everything I'd thought I was fighting for had already been lost. My son was dead. My house was compromised. My life was forfeit. The only question left was whether Karina and I would live long enough to see morning. Subscribe and hit that notification bell if you think they'll survive the night, because tomorrow's deadline is going to test everything they thought they knew about survival. The probate hearing was a trap, and I'd walked right into it. Judge Winters sat behind her bench, reviewing documents that would either save my life or sign my death warrant. I hadn't slept in 36 hours. Every shadow in the courtroom looked like Vincent's smile. This case has become considerably more complex than initially presented, the judge said, her voice echoing in the mostly empty room. Lionel sat beside me, his confidence from last week replaced by grim determination. Dell occupied the row behind us, her paralegal instincts sharp as ever. But they didn't know what I knew. They hadn't seen the man in the trunk. Across the aisle, Karina looked like she was attending her own funeral. Her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but she stared straight ahead with the hollow expression of someone who'd already given up hope. Your Honor, Lionel began, we have new evidence that substantially changes the nature of this case. He stood and walked to the evidence table, where he'd arranged photographs, documents, and what looked like audio equipment. 3 days ago, my client was approached by individuals claiming to represent her deceased son's gambling creditors. These individuals made explicit threats against her life and property. Judge Winters leaned forward. What kind of threats, Mr. Cray? Death threats, Your Honor. They demanded she liquidate all her assets to pay debts she knew nothing about. When she refused, they showed her evidence of what happens to people who don't cooperate. My hands started shaking. Lionel had convinced me to wear a wire during my meeting with Vincent. Had recorded everything they'd said in that clearing where Roberto's body lay in the trunk. Furthermore, Lionel continued, we have evidence suggesting that Mr. Delane's death may not have been accidental. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs from the few spectators present. Judge Winters banged her gavel. That's a very serious accusation, Counselor. We have recorded conversations indicating that the decedent's vehicle was tampered with. That his death was orchestrated to prevent him from paying his debts through legitimate channels. Lionel pressed play on the audio device. Vincent's voice filled the courtroom, cold and matter-of-fact as he described brake lines and mechanical failures. I watched Karina's face crumble as she heard the confirmation of what we'd both suspected. David hadn't died in an accident. He'd been murdered. Your Honor, Karina's lawyer stood up, his face pale. My client had no knowledge of any criminal activity. She was attempting to protect Mrs. Delane from creditors who had already killed her son. Judge Winters interrupted. Yes, I'm beginning to understand the situation. She turned to me. Mrs. Delane, are you in immediate danger? Yes, Your Honor. They've given me until noon today to produce $250,000, or they'll kill me. And my neighbor. And anyone else they think might pressure me to pay. The judge checked her watch. It was 11:30. Bailiff, contact the FBI field office immediately. Tell them we have an active extortion case involving organized crime. FBI. The word sent a thrill of hope through me, followed immediately by terror. If Vincent found out I'd involved federal agents. Your Honor, I said, these people have been watching me. If they see police cars, if they think I've violated our agreement. Mrs. Delane, you're under the protection of this court now. No one is going to hurt you. But even as she said it, I saw movement in the back of the courtroom. A man in a dark suit had slipped in during the proceedings. He caught my eye and tapped his watch. Noon was coming. Furthermore, Judge Winters continued, I'm ordering an immediate investigation into the defendant's property transfers. If Mrs. Webb was indeed trying to protect you from criminal extortion, her actions may have been legally justified. Karina looked up for the first time. Your Honor, I need to tell you something else. About the other victims. Other victims? This organization has been targeting elderly property owners throughout the county, using their children's and grandchildren's gambling debts as leverage to steal real estate. Mrs. Delane isn't the first. She pulled out a folder from her purse. I have documentation on 7 other cases. 7 other families destroyed by these people. The man in the back of the courtroom was gone. Somehow, that frightened me more than his presence had. Your Honor, Lionel said urgently, we need to move Mrs. Delane to protective custody immediately. These people don't make idle threats. Agreed. Bailiff, arrange for. The courtroom lights went out. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Through the windows, I could see that the power was out across the entire courthouse complex. Nobody move, Judge Winters commanded. This is probably just a... The fire alarm started screaming. In the chaos that followed, people shouting, moving toward exits, the judge calling for order, I felt a hand grip my arm. Time to go, Vincent's voice whispered in my ear. He'd found me. Even here, surrounded by lawyers and bailiffs and the supposed protection of the court, he'd found me. The building's on fire, he said conversationally. Terrible accident. Old wiring, you know. In all the confusion, an elderly woman could easily get separated from the group. Could easily get lost trying to find her way out. I looked around desperately for Lionel, for Dell, for anyone who could help. But in the red emergency lighting and the press of people evacuating, I couldn't see anyone I recognized. Except Karina. She stood 20 feet away, staring at Vincent with an expression I couldn't read. Not fear. Not surprise. Recognition. Hello, sweetheart, Vincent said to her. Miss me? The world tilted sideways. Karina knew Vincent. Had known him all along. You're working with them, I breathed. I'm sorry, Marjorie, she said, but she didn't sound sorry. She sounded tired. I never wanted it to go this far. The whole thing. The fraud, the documents, all of it. You're working together. Vincent's smile was answer enough. David really did owe us money, Karina said. That part was true. But when he died, We saw an opportunity. Your house, your savings. It was too good to pass up. So you stole my life to pay his debts? We stole your life to get rich, Vincent corrected. David's debts were pocket change compared to what your property is worth. The fire alarm continued screaming. People pushed past us toward the exits. Smoke was beginning to fill the hallway. Time to go, Vincent said again. We have a car waiting. But as we moved toward the door, I heard something that made my heart soar with hope. Sirens. Lots of them. Getting closer. Vincent heard them too. His smile faltered for the first time. FBI, Karina said quietly. They moved faster than we expected. Through the smoke and chaos, I saw them. Federal agents in bulletproof vests, flooding into the building. Real protection. Real justice. Vincent's grip on my arm tightened. This isn't over, old woman. We know where you live. We know where your friends live. This is just a temporary setback. Actually, said a voice behind us, it's a permanent solution. Agent Sarah Martinez stepped out of the smoke, her weapon drawn and trained on Vincent's chest. Vincent Corelli, you're under arrest for extortion, conspiracy, and murder. The nightmare was finally over. But as they led Vincent away in handcuffs, as Karina was read her rights, as the smoke cleared and the sirens faded, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. Vincent's last words weren't a threat. They were a promise. And men like him always keep their promises. Comment justice if you believe they caught the right people. But remember, in the criminal world, there's always someone bigger pulling the strings.
6 months later, I stood in my kitchen making coffee and trying to pretend I felt safe. The FBI had arrested Vincent, Karina, and 12 other members of what they called a sophisticated elder exploitation ring. The trial had made national news. Justice served. Case closed. But I still jumped every time the phone rang. Agent Martinez had tried to prepare me for this. PTSD, she'd called it. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Normal response to what I'd been through. The nightmares would fade, she'd promised. The fear would diminish with time. She'd been wrong about both. My house felt like a museum now. Everything exactly as it had been before Karina's betrayal, but somehow different. Poisoned by the knowledge of what had almost happened here. The doorbell rang, and my coffee mug shattered against the kitchen floor. I crept to the window and peered through the curtains. A delivery truck sat in my driveway, the driver already walking back toward his vehicle after leaving a package on my porch. Just a delivery. Normal life. Nothing to fear. But my hands still shook as I cleaned up the broken ceramic. The package was from Dell, who'd moved to Arizona to be closer to her grandchildren. Inside was a newspaper clipping from the Phoenix Tribune with a note, "Thought you should see this." The headline made my blood freeze. Federal witness found dead in prison cell. Vincent Corelli had been stabbed to death by his cellmate 3 days ago. The article was brief, clinical. Prison violence. Under investigation. No suspects in custody. But I knew better. Vincent had been silenced before he could testify about the bigger players in the organization. The people who'd been pulling his strings from the beginning. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Almost let it go to voicemail. But something made me pick up. "Hello, Mrs. Delane." The voice was different from Vincent's. Older. More refined. But just as cold. "I believe we need to talk." "Who is this?" "A friend of Vincent's. He spoke very highly of you before his unfortunate accident." My legs gave out. I sank into the kitchen chair, clutching the phone. "Vincent's dead," I whispered. "Yes. Tragic, really. But business must continue. Debts don't disappear just because collectors die, Mrs. Delane." The FBI said the case was closed. Everyone was arrested. Vincent was middle management. A face for the operation. The real organization is much larger, much more sophisticated than federal agents realize. Through my kitchen window, I saw a black sedan parked across the street. It hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. What do you want? The same thing Vincent wanted. Payment in full for your son's obligations. With interest, of course. It's been accumulating while we dealt with this unfortunate federal interference. How much? $400,000. The number hit like a physical blow. More than my house was worth. More than I could possibly pay. I don't have that kind of money. But you have other assets. Your neighbor Mrs. Chen, for instance. Lovely woman. Very fond of her grandchildren. Terror flooded through me. Leave her alone. This is between you and me. Nothing is between you and me, Mrs. Delane. Everything is between you and the organization. We're everywhere. We see everything. We know about your new friend Agent Martinez and her daughter who attends college in Seattle. We know about your lawyer Lionel and his evening jogging route. We know about Dell in Arizona and her grandson's little league schedule. Everyone who'd helped me was now in danger because of me. What do you want me to do? Same as before. Liquidate your assets. Sign over your property. Disappear quietly. And if I refuse? You won't refuse. Because this time, we're not making threats. We're making promises. And unlike Vincent, we don't believe in second chances. The line went dead. I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of my normal life, and realized that the nightmare hadn't ended with Vincent's arrest. It had just begun a new chapter. These people were everywhere. Had resources the FBI couldn't match. Could wait months or years for the perfect moment to strike. I picked up my phone and dialed Agent Martinez. Sarah, it's Marjorie Delane. They're back. Who's back? The organization. Vincent's bosses. They want $400,000, and they're threatening everyone who helped me. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, pack a bag. Right now. We're putting you in witness protection. For how long? However long it takes. I looked around my kitchen one last time. At the table where I'd shared breakfast with my son. At the window where I'd watched him play in the backyard. At the life I'd spent 68 years building. What if it never ends? I asked. Then we keep running, Sarah said. Because the alternative is unacceptable. An hour later, I walked out of my house carrying nothing but a suitcase and my folder of photos. A different agent drove me to a different safe house in a different state with a different name. But as we pulled away, I saw the black sedan following at a discreet distance. Running wouldn't save me. The FBI couldn't protect me forever. These people had all the time in the world and resources I couldn't imagine. There was only one way this would ever truly end. And it wouldn't end with me running. It would end with me fighting back. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see how this grandmother's story of survival becomes a story of revenge. Because sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted.
2 years later, I sat in a diner in Portland, Oregon, reading my own obituary. Marjorie Delane, 70, died peacefully in her sleep at Sacred Heart Hospice after a long battle with cancer. Services will be private. In lieu of flowers, donations may be made to the Alzheimer's Foundation. The FBI had done excellent work. The obituary even included a photo that looked like me, if you didn't look too closely. Close enough to fool casual observers. Detailed enough to satisfy anyone checking. Marjorie Delane was officially dead. Had been for 6 months. The woman sitting in this diner, drinking coffee and planning revenge, was someone else entirely. My new name was Helen Foster. 68 years old, recently widowed, recently moved to Portland to be closer to family. A perfectly ordinary grandmother who minded her own business and paid her bills on time. Except Helen Foster had something Marjorie Delane had never possessed: nothing left to lose. The organization had made a critical error when they'd killed Vincent in prison. They'd assumed it would silence him permanently, would end the federal investigation and clear the way for them to resume business as usual. Instead, it had given me exactly what I needed: proof that they were still active, still dangerous, still hunting. And it had given me time to prepare. Agent Martinez thought I was in witness protection in Minnesota, living quietly under federal supervision. She sent birthday cards to an address that forwarded them to a P.O. box I checked once a month. What she didn't know was that Helen Foster had been busy for 2 years, learning about the organization that had destroyed her son and stolen her life. Following money trails through shell companies and offshore accounts. Identifying the real power structure behind Vincent's operation. I'd learned that the man who'd called me after Vincent's death was named Anthony Torino. That he ran gambling operations in 12 states. That his weakness was his grandson, a college kid who attended Portland State University and had no idea his tuition was paid with blood money. I'd learned that Karina was serving 8 years in federal prison but would be eligible for parole in 18 months. That she'd been corresponding with someone using the name Michael Ross, who visited her every few weeks. Michael Ross was Anthony Torino's nephew. I'd learned that Mrs. Chun was still living in the house next to my old property, still watering the flowers she'd planted in my memory. Still in danger as long as the organization existed. But most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes justice doesn't come from courtrooms or federal agents or legal proceedings. Sometimes it comes from a grandmother with nothing left to lose and all the time in the world to plan. The bell above the diner door chimed as a young man entered. 22 years old, dark hair, wearing a Portland State sweatshirt. He ordered coffee and sat in the booth behind me, pulling out textbooks and a laptop. Tommy Torino. Anthony's grandson. Pre-med student. Honor roll. Volunteer at the local homeless shelter. A good kid who had no idea his grandfather was a monster. I finished my coffee, left a tip, and walked past his table on my way out. As I passed, I accidentally bumped his backpack off the bench. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I exclaimed, helping him gather his scattered papers. "No problem," he said with a smile that reminded me painfully of David at that age. "Happens all the time." As I handed him his papers, I made sure he saw the small device I'd attached to his laptop bag. Not a GPS tracker, too obvious. Something much more sophisticated that Agent Martinez had unknowingly provided during one of our security briefings. "Have a good day, dear," I said. "You too, ma'am." I walked out into the Portland rain, pulling my hood up against the drizzle. Phase 1 was complete. Tommy's laptop was now connected to a network that would monitor every keystroke, every email, every video call. When Anthony contacted his grandson, and he would, because family was everything to men like him, I'd know about it. Phase 2 would begin when Tommy went home for Thanksgiving break in 3 weeks. When he carried my little gift back to the family compound in Chicago. Phase 3 would be the end of the organization that had killed my son. I walked 6 blocks to my apartment, a modest 1-bedroom that Helen Foster rented under a lease that couldn't be traced to any government database. Inside, I opened my laptop and checked the monitoring software. Tommy's computer was already transmitting data. Class schedules, study groups, text messages to a girlfriend named Ashley. Normal college life. But buried in his email history, I found what I was looking for: regular correspondence with an address registered to at Enterprises. Anthony's legitimate business front. The emails were innocuous. Updates about school, requests for money, family news. But the metadata told a different story. They were routed through encrypted servers in 3 different countries before reaching their destination. Anthony Torino was paranoid about security. Good. Paranoid people made predictable mistakes when they thought they were safe. I opened a new document and began typing. Final report, Operation Grandmother's Revenge. Target identified. Surveillance in place. Estimated time 2